There was a time when the fastest meal in the house was also the one with the most heart in it. No drive-thrus, no delivery apps. Just whatever was sitting in the icebox, a little bit of know-how, and maybe 10 minutes before someone hungry walked through the door. These recipes lived in church cookbooks, homemaker magazines, and index cards stained with bacon grease, passed from one kitchen to the next until, somehow, almost all of them just disappeared. So let's bring 30 of them back, one at a time, and see how many of these your own grandmother used to make. We're starting with something that sounds fancy, but really wasn't. Curried eggs in cream sauce. You take hard-boiled eggs, already peeled and waiting in the fridge, and you make a quick little sauce out of cream, butter, and curry powder. Heat it, pour it over the eggs, done. Mid-century cooks pulled this idea from Anglo-Indian kitchens and stripped it down to whatever was already sitting in the pantry, no fancy spice rack needed. It turned up a lot during Lent, when meat wasn't on the table, but flavor still had to be. Spoon it over toast or rice, and it tastes like it simmered all afternoon. It didn't. 10 minutes. Tops. Now here's one that sounds like a joke until you hear the story behind it. City chicken. Straight out of the Depression, this one skewered little cubes of pork or veal, breaded them up and fried or broiled them until they looked exactly like a fried drumstick. Real chicken was rationed during the war, but nobody's creativity was. So families stretched a little bit of meat into something that felt like a whole Sunday dinner. And here's the thing, kids who loved fried chicken genuinely couldn't tell the difference. That was the entire point. Let's slow down for a second and talk tea sandwiches, because these were a whole event on their own. Cream cheese and olive sandwiches. Soft white bread, a thick smear of cream cheese, and green olives sliced neat and laid on top. Cut them into triangles or little pinwheels, and suddenly an ordinary Tuesday afternoon felt like something was happening. These showed up at bridge clubs and church luncheons from the 40s, clear through the 70s. A dusting of paprika, a sprig of parsley, and you had something that felt just a little grown up, a little unexpected. Salty, creamy, and honestly kind of unforgettable. Okay, this next one might sound strange if you didn't grow up with it. Peanut butter and bacon toast. Toast the bread. Spread on a heavy layer of peanut butter and top it with bacon straight out of the pan, still crackling with grease. Wartime cookbooks called this a protein pick-me-up for hungry kids, night shift workers, even soldiers home on leave. Some folks tossed on banana slices, some added a little cinnamon and sugar. Even plain, it worked. Salty, sweet, rich enough to get you through the rest of a long day. Now, if you wanted to really impress the neighbors back then, you made a jellied tomato cocktail. Tomato juice, plain gelatin, a splash of lemon, a dash of Worcestershire, a pinch of celery salt, all stirred together and left in the fridge to set into this wobbly, savory red jelly. Poured into little glasses with a celery stick sticking out, it told everyone walking in the door that this was a proper gathering. Women's magazines in the 50s and 60s put it right next to the deviled eggs on the party tray. Some people thought the texture was strange. Fair enough, but it looked far more impressive than the 10 minutes it actually took to throw together. Here's a lighter one. Cottage cheese and pineapple plate. A scoop of cottage cheese, a canned pineapple ring, a leaf of lettuce underneath, maybe a cherry on top if you were feeling fancy. No cooking, no prep, basically no effort at all. It showed up on every diet menu and every women's club lunch from the 60s into the 70s. Sold as light and healthy, sure, but really it survived because it was fast and it left nothing to clean up. If you ever scraped the last bite of this off a melamine bowl as a kid, you already know exactly what I'm talking about. Moving on to something a little more filling. Hot dog and cheese roll-ups. Roll a slice of bread flat, tuck a hot dog inside, Sprinkle on some cheese, roll the whole thing up like a little cigar, and bake or broil it until it's bubbly and crisp. This came straight out of post-war budget flyers, and it bent to whatever you had. Mustard, relish, a different cheese. Didn't matter. Serve it with a bowl of tomato soup or some carrot sticks, and you'd just fed the family off a nearly empty fridge in about 10 minutes. Quick one here, and it's almost too simple to count as a recipe. Celery sticks with cheese spread. Clean a stalk of celery, pack the middle full of orange cheese spread, shake on some paprika. That's it. You could crank out 10 of these in 10 minutes flat when guests showed up early or a lunchbox needed something extra. They turned up in homemaker magazines and old TV commercials, praised for the crunch and the color as much as the speed. Kids loved them. Adults pretended they were only for kids, and somehow everyone kept eating them anyway. Let's talk about the soup that got an entire generation through snow days. Tomato soup with saltines and butter. Heat up a can of tomato soup, crumble in some saltines, drop in a pat of butter right at the end, and watch it swirl across the top. That's the whole trick. It fed kids home from school and college students in cold basement apartments for pennies a bowl. The crackers thickened it just enough, and that little swirl of butter made a can taste almost homemade. Cheap, reliable, and somehow it always tasted like somebody cared. This next one is a little bit silly, and that's exactly why people remember it. Bologna cups with peas and cheese. Take a slice of bologna, snip the edges, drop it into a muffin tin. Bake or pan fry it, and the edges curl up into a little cup. Fill it with canned peas and shredded cheese, and dinner's basically done in 10 minutes with almost no cleanup. This one belongs entirely to the 70s. Colorful, a little goofy, but genuinely filling. Kids thought it was hilarious. Parents just thought it was easy. Now here's a real church cookbook classic. Salmon patties with cornmeal crust. Drain a can of salmon, mash it up with egg and onion, and coat it in a generous dusting of cornmeal before it hits a hot skillet. That cornmeal gives you a crisp, golden edge that makes the whole thing feel like more effort than it was. These showed up on Friday nights during Lent, and on nights when the grocery budget was stretched thin. A squeeze of lemon, maybe a little tartar sauce, and leftovers made a fine sandwich the next day too. Ever had leftover spaghetti and no idea what to do with it? Somebody in the 50s figured it out. Spaghetti spoon pie. Mix the leftover noodles with a beaten egg and a little shredded cheese, press it into a pie pan, and bake it until the bottom crisps and the top sets. 10 minutes later, yesterday's dinner is a completely different dish, one you can cut into wedges like an actual pie. Born entirely out of thrift, this one stretched a few leftover cups of pasta into something that looked, and honestly tasted, brand new. Not every recipe on this list is glamorous, and this next one is proof. Canned spinach with vinegar and sugar. Canned spinach has a reputation for tasting a little metallic and flat, so home cooks during the war years fixed it with a spoonful of vinegar for sharpness and a spoonful of sugar to balance it out. Heat it, stir it together, and you get this sweet, sour, softened side dish that filled the plate when fresh vegetables just weren't available. It wasn't meant to impress anybody. It was meant to add a little brightness to an otherwise plain dinner. And it did. Let's pick things back up with something a little more fun. Corn fritters with syrup. Canned corn, flour, an egg, a little baking powder, a splash of milk, mixed into a batter that puffs and browns fast in a hot skillet. Serve them savory with salt and pepper, or sweet with syrup or honey drizzled over the top. Diners across the South and Midwest served these as sides for decades, and at home, the recipe bent to whatever you had on hand. No cornmeal? Use flour. No syrup? Try jam. Canned corn, hot oil, and a little bit of hope. That's really all it took. If you grew up in the South, you probably already know this next one by heart. Pimento cheese on toast points. Shredded cheddar, mayonnaise, chopped pimentos, a splash of vinegar, all mixed together into a tangy spread that gets slathered onto buttered, broiled toast triangles. Southern cookbooks treated this practically as a rite of passage, the kind of thing passed down by women who knew how to host a party on a dime. Weddings, funerals, church suppers, this spread showed up everywhere, made entirely from things already sitting in the fridge. Here's a breakfast that stretched exactly 1 egg across an entire family. 1 egg raisin pancakes, a single egg, a bit of flour, some water or milk, a pinch of salt, whisked into a thin batter that's closer to a crepe than the thick stacks we make today. Raisins, sometimes plumped up in leftover tea, added sweetness so you didn't even need syrup. For families living on pennies a day, 1 egg feeding 6 or 8 people at breakfast meant absolutely everything. Dust them with powdered sugar if you had it, or just eat them plain. Either way, it worked. For dessert, and this one's almost embarrassingly easy, microwave baked apples. Core an apple, stuff the middle with brown sugar and a pat of margarine, and microwave it until it's soft and bubbling. That's the whole recipe. Well under 10 minutes, and it tastes like it baked for an hour. A dash of cinnamon or a handful of raisins dresses it up, but even completely plain, the smell alone fills the kitchen with the scent of autumn. Spoon a little of that melted sugar butter from the bottom of the dish over the top, and you've got dessert on a budget. Back to something savory for dinner. Creamed corn and egg skillet. Heat up a can of creamed corn in a skillet, crack in a couple of eggs, and gently stir until everything sets. No measuring, no chopping, no baking, just a few minutes on the stove. This came straight out of 1950s meal plans filed under economy suppers, and it fed 4 people off 1 can and 2 eggs. A little pepper, a little parsley if you had it. It was never trying to be a showpiece. It was a solution, hot and ready in the time it took to set the table. Now, this next side dish looked far more intentional than it actually was. Shredded lettuce with mayonnaise and paprika. Finely shred a head of iceberg lettuce, drop it in a mound on a plate, top it with a generous spoonful of mayonnaise, and dust the whole thing with paprika. That's it. No chopping other vegetables, no dressing to mix. This showed up on lunchroom trays right next to deviled eggs and tomato slices all through the 50s and 60s. Cold, crunchy, a little creamy, and it worked with meatloaf, sandwiches, or tuna salad alike. Here's one that showed up at every holiday table and plenty of Tuesday nights too. Canned asparagus with cheese sauce. Drain a can of asparagus spears, warm them in a pan, and pour over a quick cheese sauce made from evaporated milk, margarine, and cheddar. The whole thing comes together in under 10 minutes, and the richness of that cheese sauce makes canned vegetables feel like something worth serving guests. Kids who normally turned their nose up at asparagus somehow always cleaned their plate for this version. Dessert time again, and no oven required. Graham cracker pudding cups. Mix up a box of instant pudding, layer it with graham crackers in teacups or old jelly jars, and let it sit. As the crackers soak in the fridge, they soften into something that tastes almost like cake. These turned up at sleepovers and after-school snack time for an entire generation, sometimes topped with whipped topping or a few sprinkles, but perfectly good plain too. For kids used to stretching whatever was around, this felt like a small, sweet miracle. Let's talk dinner again, and a fancy-sounding one at that. Minute steak with mustard butter. Sear paper-thin cuts of beef fast in a hot skillet, and while they cook, mix softened butter with mustard, spicy brown, yellow, whatever you had. Spoon that glaze over the steak the second it comes off the heat, and watch it melt across the surface like a sauce from a much fancier kitchen. Post-war cookbooks called this efficient elegance, a way to feel proud of dinner even when the cut of meat was thin and the clock was shorter than you'd like. Back to something sweet for breakfast or a side. Cottage fried apples. Slice up a few apples thin, drop them in a hot pan with butter, and add brown sugar until it melts and coats every slice, right up to the edge of caramel. The whole thing takes about 10 minutes, sometimes less if you're not fussy about it. Spoon it over toast, waffles, oatmeal, or serve it right alongside pork chops. This was a great way to use up the less than perfect apples of the season, the bruised ones, the small ones, the ones a little too tart to eat on their own. Now here's one that only makes sense once you're truly hungry. Cracker omelette. Beat a couple of eggs, crush in some saltine crackers, dry or soaked, your choice, and pour it all into a hot skillet. The crackers soften but keep a little texture, and the whole thing puffs up slightly as it cooks. Depression-era cookbooks listed this as a way to stretch eggs and add bulk to a thin meal. Add onion, cheese, or vegetables if you had them, but even completely plain, it filled the belly. This wasn't restaurant food. This was survival food with a little creativity baked right in. Let's talk about the lunchroom favorite that everybody remembers by name. Cheese Dreams. White bread topped with a slab of cheddar and a single tomato slice, broiled until the cheese bubbles and the bread crisps up at the edges. These showed up in cookbooks from the 40s clear through the 70s, sometimes with a sprinkle of oregano, sometimes swapped for pimento cheese instead. You made these when the fridge was nearly empty, and somehow they always felt like more than what they actually were. For a dessert with zero effort, try instant coffee ice cream cups. Whip up some whipped topping, stir in a spoonful of instant coffee and a little sugar, spoon it into cups, and freeze for about an hour. No churning, no ice cream maker, no fuss whatsoever. These got pulled out of the freezer after dinner or served at card games, and they honestly felt more refined than anything that easy has a right to be. A cherry on top or a little shaved chocolate, and you had something that tasted like it came from a real ice cream counter. This next one sounds a little unusual, but stick with it. Potato chip and egg scramble. Crush up a handful of chips, stir them into beaten eggs, and scramble the whole thing in a buttered pan. The chips soften but somehow keep a bit of their crunch, landing somewhere between breakfast and a guilty pleasure. This showed up as a novelty dish in 60s cookbooks and never really left the memory of anyone who tried it. Salty, crispy, creamy, and ready in well under 10 minutes with just 2 ingredients and 1 pan. Here's a treat that turned an ordinary jar of applesauce into something a kid would actually get excited about. Applesauce with red hots melted in. Warm up a jar of applesauce on the stove, stir in a handful of cinnamon red hot candies, and watch them melt into swirls of bright crimson through the whole pot. This one was loved by kids and praised by mothers all through the 50s and 60s. It looked like effort, but really it was just a shortcut, and it tasted like a tiny celebration on an otherwise ordinary weeknight. Now for a lunchbox classic that snuck dessert into an actual sandwich. Peanut butter and honey on raisin bread. Thick peanut butter, sticky golden honey, and raisin bread with those little bursts of sweetness baked right in. No jelly needed, no butter needed, just 2 slices and about 5 minutes. These got wrapped in wax paper and packed into lunchboxes across the 60s and 70s, and even a little squished by lunchtime. They still hit the spot every single time. And to close things out, here's one that's about as no fuss as it gets. Cold baked beans on saltines. Open a can of baked beans and spoon them right onto saltine crackers. No heating, no mixing, no dressing up whatsoever. This showed up in 70s snack cookbooks under quick fix and no cook sections, and it earned its spot through pure practicality. The salt of the cracker balanced the sweet, tangy beans, and that crunch then softened texture made it strangely satisfying every time. So why did meals like these disappear first? Maybe because nobody ever wrote them down properly to begin with. They just got passed along on index cards and half-remembered instructions from somebody standing over a stove, feeding a family through rationing, tight budgets, and busy weeknights, all without ever asking for more than 10 minutes and whatever happened to be sitting in the pantry. And if even one of these brought back a memory, you already know exactly what your own grandmother's kitchen used to smell like.